Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to wyomingpbs.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
It's week 4 of Capital Outlook here in Cheyenne, the halfway mark of the Wyoming Legislature's 65th session. I'm Craig Blumenshine from Wyoming PBS, and thanks for joining us. We have a lot to cover. We begin our discussion tonight with blockchain. Senator Ogden Driskill and Representative Tyler Lindholm, the crypto cowboys, get into what blockchain really might mean for Wyoming. A wide-ranging interview with Senator Cale is our profile this week. Then we'll visit with 2 freshman legislators in the Wyoming Legislature and end with our weekly discussion with the leadership of the Wyoming Legislature. All that's next on Capital Outlook, which begins now.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.
And welcome to week 4 of Capital Outlook. I'm Craig Blumenshine with Wyoming PBS, and we're going to start today's show with a discussion on blockchain. We've talked about it before. We want to talk about it some more. It's obviously an important topic. And you two are the leaders of that discussion here in the Wyoming Legislature, at least from my perspective, Representative Tyler Lindholm and Senator Ogden Driskill. Thank you so much for joining us. I think the first question that many Wyomingites have is, why is blockchain still a big deal to Wyoming? What's it mean? Representative, let me start with you.
Sure. So I think if you look at why it's such a big deal and why Wyoming's interested in this is to give you a little bit of back history. The state of Wyoming, all of humanity has essentially developed 2 types of ledger technology over the entire history of mankind. The first time we did something was essentially we're going to write down how many pigs or how many bags of grain we've got on a clay tablet. And then in the 1300s, some monks came about with the idea of double entry. And then all of a sudden in 2009, a distributed ledger technology came about. So this is the third. And that's why it's such a big deal, is it's a whole new way and a safer way to be able to do essentially accounting or ledger. And that's why it's such a big deal. That's why big corporations such as Walmart, FedEx, Vanguard Mutual, Fidelity, those types of organizations are looking that direction. And now Wyoming is the premier place of the world to look at that type of technology.
And I want to get into what that means in just a minute, but also smaller companies like Beef Chain. Senator Driskill?
Well, Beef Chain's been really a fun one because we were trying to find ways to bring the technology to Wyoming.
And what I should tell our viewers is this is something that you're involved in directly that utilizes blockchain.
As is Tyler. We're partners, or number of us are partners in the company. Actually involves all the way from basically birth all the way to on your plate tracking of beef animals.
For example, FedEx and some of these carrier packages, Walmart is using it for leafy greens to trace back to the producer. Just because you can't change a blockchain, and that immutable concept allows for trust, it allows for verification, and allows for consumer confidence, and that is just paramount.
Okay, everything that you've described to me, okay, why isn't Idaho big into this? And what have the decisions this legislature is making made that more easier for Wyoming? But again, the bottom line is, what does it mean to Wyoming? What does it mean that Wyoming is ahead in the blockchain world?
So one of the biggest aspects that we were asked to do in the last couple of years was find ways that the state of Wyoming can diversify itself economically. And this is one of those areas that I've been pretty geeky on for quite some time, and an area that's looked for a home to be able to feel like they've got a regulatory space that they can actually be treated the same as other industries. And so we kind of saw that as an opportunity. Maybe we can attract some of these businesses, and what that means for the state of Wyoming on attracting these businesses is they're paying domiciling fees to be able to register their corporation here. But on top of that, they're actually coming here and bringing jobs with them. They're buying property. They're paying sales tax, all of those aspects.
Let me ask you about those jobs real briefly, because many of us who have looked into this have seen pictures of server farms.
Yep.
trailer after trailer after trailer filled with hundreds or thousands of servers operated by a couple engineers.
Sure. Yeah.
Is that what we're talking about here?
Burning,
Not even close.
All right.
well, somewhat. Burning good, clean coal energy. Absolutely.
And
For mining. which is a
finding
different
places
thing.
with cheap power.
right.
Right? But to me, that's not very many new employees to the state of Wyoming.
Sure.
But certainly there are other.
So the mining
issues
goes
here.
in two levels on employees. We're just getting to see that right now. Down in the Southwest, they're talking about closing down some of our power plants and converting them over, which going from coal to gas is about 600 jobs down there. So anytime you're consuming energy, you're creating jobs. Our coal fields and our power plants, which generally that's the cheap energy.
And these computers require a lot of power.
Huge amounts of energy, and we provide a good end of it. And that's just a tiny part, and that's not the part I've ever really focused on at all. The other job is the financial industry that comes, the tech industries, and that's what's fun. You talk about Idaho, why aren't they doing it? Because they're not there yet. They'll be there 2 years from now. We're actually that far ahead. Tyler and I just came back from China addressing the Worldwide Blockchain Conference. And interestingly enough, Wyoming's not just in the lead in the United States, it's in the lead internationally. We had numbers of countries looking at us and saying, how do we get where Wyoming's
And you're
at?
talking about in the lead, meaning the
Cutting edge technology on how to create an environment that is able
a
and
regulatory
healthy.
environment or the lack thereof that allows this to prosper. Is that what
Yeah, and actually we have provided a regulatory environment. Interestingly enough, it's not a lack thereof. It's putting some sideboards on it that they can operate in parameters and being flexible enough to make those regulations move. And ironically, I presented another bill this morning. This is moving the sandbox technology bill from blockchain is now a medical sandbox bill in the Wyoming legislature. And all of this together is starting to make Wyoming really be well known as an
medical as in
innovator.
medical records, I would assume.
Medical testing devices. So we're really looking on it at bringing in devices for testing on Wyoming citizens. We've got a real innovator, a guy named Lee Stein came in, and they've done a scanner called Spiral that came in, and he came up with some of the ideas, said, look, why isn't Wyoming doing testing? So as you bring in these folks, they start bringing in these innovative ideas, and you really become a Silicon Valley. You got the great minds, they come. Tyler was really on the blockchain, literally a half a decade ahead of a lot of the rest of what was
Let me ask you this question. You said that other states may catch up. Wyoming has a lot going for it, but also millennials want a lot of things in their community, in their state, of which to come. Does Wyoming have what high-tech workers want? Is that enough to get them here?
Well, and so this is it's out there, it's public now, but most folks probably don't realize what the Wyoming House did last night. This is pretty exciting stuff. I ran a budget amendment last night for the University of Wyoming to set up at the University of Wyoming a fintech certificate and a blockchain certificate as far as providing those opportunities for our youth to be able to work in this sector. Right now, for every individual that has that experience in these fields, there's 16 jobs waiting for that one person. So it's an open job field, and they're needing hands on deck, but nobody's really training to it. In fact, in the United States, there's no college or university that offers those certificates, and this is an opportunity for Wyoming to not only be the first on, but hopefully attract a lot more talent to the state and to our university.
Blockchain has been hyper-hyped, to coin a word. Any of that slowing down in either of your two eyes?
I don't see it. The innovation's still there. You know, we're out looking for what can be next and comes. And you were talking about it as far as other people looking at it and the speed. We actually held bills this year to keep them quiet because there's actually entire states right now that have us staked out that will copy our bills. The minute they drop, they'll drop in another state the next day. They just pull them off the press and copy them.
Nevada did it already this year, which I'm not hating on Nevada or
That's
Arizona.
no problem, but it tells you where
Yeah.
they're looking. And no, I think, you know, when you get into emerging technologies, let's go back and go back to computers and the start, and you think about where it was at. And sitting on one of the old Fortran computers with punch cards to envision where we're at with a cell phone in your pocket now, it's pretty hard to envision how far it possibly can go. And the technology is not experimental anymore. It's for real. As Tyler said, major companies are using it. If the United States trades grain with China or Russia, guess what the technology is that verifies the payment? It's blockchain. So it's a given technology. It's here. The question is, can we embrace it? And that takes a bit of a culture change. And Wyoming's really been interesting in the fact that they took a pretty big jump off a cliff and embraced it, and it rewarded them.
You're talking to a coder who knows what it was like to code in Fortran with punch cards, by the way. Just so we're clear.
Pretty interesting when you compare it to the computers.
Oh my goodness.
We're really there. That end of the world, I think we're just at the first edge of what the potential is.
Some hiccups that have come about is there are some banks that have expressed some concerns with some of the bill. And I'm talking in particular about House Bill 174 that would create that special depository bank. Are their concerns relevant? Is this an opportunity to replace banks in other industries? Is that what blockchain ultimately will do, or?
No, so House Bill 74, what that takes into consideration is chartering of a new type of bank in the state of Wyoming. It doesn't cost the state of Wyoming anything to do this. We're just setting up the regulations for this new type of bank to be able to charter in the state of Wyoming. It takes private dollars, takes private capital. All of the regulations that are in place for a state chartered or a national chartered bank are reflected in this legislation, plus more to be there. What makes this bank really different is the fact that it's 100% reserved, whereas your typical state or national chartered bank is under 10%. So they're actually only holding 10% of the money that you deposit with them. They're only keeping about 10%. The rest they loan out or something along those lines. The really big part of why the banks are nervous about this one has to do with the fact that it's a may as far as utilizing FDIC insurance. And the reason why we're taking that into consideration is due to the fact that the FDIC has been pretty hard on a lot of legal businesses in the state in the United States, everything from gun manufacturers to blockchain companies. So they're having a hard time finding banks that'll hold them, even though they meet anti-money laundering and know your customer regulations. They meet those. They're still having a hard time holding a bank account, and that's what this looks to fix.
And many corporations in the industry have had trouble finding a place to bank.
Correct.
And
Correct.
This is what's
Wyoming's going to be a home to those. You know, they're going to come. The last administration actually did extreme audits on some of these companies, and it caused banks to run from them. It wasn't our bank's fault. They literally raised their rates with FDIC. So when you can't electronically file your payrolls, you can no longer do business for a decent sized business. So they literally regulated them out of business. And this bank, the other part of it that's really different, they can't loan money. These banks are a depository bank. They can't loan money, and consequently, they really aren't competition to our banks. The real threat I see is anytime you're in a mature industry, and if there was ever a mature industry in the world, it's banking. It's been around forever. A new kid on the block, I don't care who it is, if he's trading marbles, is a threat to an established industry. And, you know, it's really a tough deal. I think over time, they're going to find this enhances them, because as all banks run, as you bring more money into an area, it creates more money. It's interesting. We bring a few $1 billion more, which is, by the way, Wyoming's got $6-7 billion on deposit. We think realistically we could be in the billions of dollars on these coming in. That creates jobs. When you have money around, even if it's not going straight out into the state in loans, it creates a lot of jobs and a lot of economic opportunity.
Capitalism.
Capitalism at its best.
We have about a minute left, Senator, and let's end with you. Senate File 125, Digital Assets Custody, is maybe the most important bill relative to blockchain that this legislature will discuss. Give us a background on the bill.
I'm going to turn to Tyler on it because he knows the background on it much better. And it is, in both of our opinions, the most significant bill that's here this year.
Representative?
Yeah, so we've had a group of people, and it's a large group of people working on this piece of legislation for probably about 8 or 9 months. And what this legislation does is it takes into consideration qualified custodianship for digital assets, and it also takes into UCC provisions.
UCC is?
Uniform Commercial Code. So that has to do more on the bankruptcy aspect of how those assets are held, and the qualified custodianship takes into consideration what the Securities Exchange Commission has said about and said how these digital assets can be held. Nobody's been able to reach this, nowhere in the world. And we've been working on this for a long time. We've worked with some attorneys over in New York. We've worked with Columbia Law University. We've worked with, the list goes on, Milbank has been a great hand for us. Caitlin Long, who's been a champion for the state of Wyoming in this
Blockchain
regard.
Coalition.
That's right. She's been fantastic. She's got time with Morgan Stanley. So we've been putting a lot of work into this, and all the bill goes towards is how digital assets can be held and shall be held. And the SEC has said that it shall be a bank. So the way we set it up is that these assets can be held, may be held by any bank if they so choose. But if they choose to do so, they have to follow the entire regulatory compliance that is set up in Senate File 125, and it will be essentially the only legal way that a bank can hold digital assets in the United States under qualified custodianship, and that counts as the world.
This will be the only one there, and this is available to all banks. This
Right.
isn't just the special depository. This is available to every bank in the state of Wyoming are going to be able to use this law.
More work to do in the interim?
Yeah, absolutely.
Immense amount.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is such a burgeoning technology that the regulatory landscape that's out there for us, while we've blazed the trail, new issues crop up every day. In a lot of situations, what we did last year in regards to our Wyoming Utility Token Act, we spent a considerable amount of time this last summer cleaning that up and rewriting it. And that's one of the pieces of legislation that has crossed over to the Senate already.
The FinTech Sandbox is another big piece this year. We're asking to add on to the task force a little bit. It actually was incredibly overloaded. I don't know how many hours Caitlin and Tyler have spent, but you know, from my end, it's substantially less. It is amazing what dedication there's been.
And the irony here is two Wyoming ranchers who live about 45 miles away from each other in the northeast part of Wyoming are leading the way.
Right. Well, and this goes to a quote that me and Ogden kind of come up with, is it wasn't Wall Street that won the West. It was cowboys. And so we're
the crypto cowboys. We got the Wall Street Journal. They call us crypto cowboys.
Right. So we're out here, you know, I mean, that's the reality of the situation is I've had to learn more about banking regulation and the financial landscape than I ever thought. I came down here to pass raw milk into law and to vote on good gun laws. And now I'm probably arguably one of the most savvy members of the legislature in regards to financial technology and regulation. So it's been a great learning curve for me, but a lot of nights not getting much sleep.
Well, I think all of us will continue to watch what the impact of blockchain in Wyoming will become. And it's been a pleasure to visit with you both. Thank you so much for joining us on Capital Outlook.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And now we'll continue with our weekly feature, our profile. This week with Senator Cale Case. We had an opportunity to visit with the longtime senator at his home in Lander. Stay with us. And as our weekly tradition here on Capital Outlook, we have another Capital Outlook profile with Senator Cale Case for Lander. Senator, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
You've been serving in the legislature a long time, first in the House, now in the Senate. You're approaching the 30-year mark. You were born and raised in Lander.
Yes.
Give me an idea of who Cale Case was in junior high and high school.
Wow. So you got to think about Lander back then. That was we were a mining town. U.S. Steel. All the U.S. Steel kids were my friends. They were all big families. Lander had about as many people then as it does now, but had a lot fewer houses because they were all full of people. My dad had a pharmacy in town. He was the Democratic county chairman. People don't know that. My grandfather that lived here in this house, lived in that room there, he was just a right-wing Republican. And he and my father
Some good family debates.
Yeah, there was lots of those. My brother was in the Vietnam War. He was wounded in the Vietnam War. I can remember that when I was a little kid. Lander was a great place to grow up. As small towns all across the country are, you know, it was like a Tom Sawyer kind of days. You could just take off and come home when the dinner bell rings.
You remarked about U.S. Steel having a presence here.
Huge.
And also certainly with the mine, you know, buses going to and from Atlantic City, a union presence in Lander that probably isn't here today. Tell me what it was like in your memory from when all that, you know, when the mine closed.
Well, I was working for the city when the mine closed. I was actually the staff economist. I was putting myself through graduate school by working a lot of projects for the city of Lander. So I had actually written an economic analysis, what would happen if the mine closed, and I finished it the year before the mine closed. So it was a tool that we had as the city to understand how really huge that would be. You have to remember there were over 500 primary breadwinners that lived up there or worked up there. It was obviously mostly male in those days, but they brought home big money. That's a lot of people in a town of 7,000 people. So you can imagine how that hit. I can remember when it really was kicking in and people were moving and houses were for sale. You could literally look down any long street and you would see more than a dozen for sale signs, just as far as your eye could see down the streets. And that was astounding. That was unnerving.
Fast forward to Lander today.
Wow, Lander today. It's a very different town. It's a very progressive community. I like that a lot. And it's got a lot of young blood. It's a vigorous community. But it's more outdoor orientated, probably than any community in Wyoming except for Jackson, I suppose, maybe. And
the influence of the National Outdoor Leadership School.
Huge, but lots of other great organizations too, like the Nature Conservancy, Trout Unlimited, the Wyoming Outdoor Council. The Wyoming Catholic College is here now, and they have a big outdoor component. So there's a lot of things that fit into people really enjoying.
Does Lander want to grow in Fremont County?
Well, does Lander want to grow? I think so. I think people would really like their children to be able to come back to Lander, but they kind of want growth on their own terms, which isn't a bad thing, honestly. I think we're just kind of sorting ourselves out. Small towns are struggling all over, and Lander has its own struggles. With the demise of Main Street and not being able to buy things locally, and that's why I think shop local is such an important thing. It puts money in people's pockets that are in your community. But those are struggles that Lander has as well as anybody else. I think we've perhaps done a better job in some areas, but there's a lot more challenges.
You talk about Lander's Main Street, and everyone thinks of Lander on the 4th of July. This place is, for those who don't know, is unlike any other.
It is true.
On the 4th. Describe for our viewers, what Lander is.
People never believe you because people always think they have great 4th of Julys or so-and-so put on great 4th of July. In Lander, everybody has a professional show. Everybody, the amount of money that goes into fireworks on the 4th of July in Lander is astounding. And you can go to a high spot and look down on the town and you see professional quality shows throughout the town at the same time.
Not dozens, hundreds or more.
It's very heavy duty.
The sound here on the 4th of July is outstanding. And the parade is great. Lander has a great tradition for its Pioneer Days parade.
We really do embrace Pioneer Days.
Turn the page just a moment. You've served for a long time and been a great advocate on the Select Tribal Relations Committee.
Right.
Does Wyoming get it right in the way it works with the tribes?
We never get it perfectly right, but we do very well, and we do better than any other state. It's astounding, the sharing that we have. What folks don't realize is that Wyoming taxes tribal minerals. People didn't understand that. We put a severance tax on the minerals that are produced from tribal lands. And so for a long time, that was a little bit of a one-way street where money was going from the Wind River Reservation into Cheyenne and again out in Wyoming. But I've been working very hard to change that. And we have had some astounding successes. For example, tribal governments now can qualify for water development projects. And in fact, we've had several. Between the transportation, the education, I think we've finally turned the corner and are getting tribal citizens the services they deserve from the state.
There's always been this push-pull with the tribal liaisons, at least in the last decade, with state government, with the executive, and with the tribes. Why is that?
Oh, to tell you the truth, I think most of it is that folks in Cheyenne don't understand how complicated the relationship with tribal governments are. And we're the only state that has a reservation like this, and it's the only reservation in the country that is jointly governed by two sovereign tribes. That doesn't happen anywhere else. You hear about Hopi and Navajo, but they have separate jurisdictions and territories. This is common. It makes it very difficult for the tribal governments to function. But add to that working with the state government, and you can see how complicated it can be. So we take family services and social services. You have a state role, and you've got a role from each tribal government.
As well as the federal government.
As well as the federal government. So everything is a challenge. It takes a little bit more coordination, but we're doing a good job. And astoundingly, there are higher levels of state-provided services on this reservation than anywhere else. And I mean that very definitively. In a lot of reservations, the state doesn't actually provide even the school systems. And to get assistance for municipal type functions like water systems, and we've even done a better job in transportation. The Department of Health gets tons of kudos lately for the work that's happened there, and a lot of work to the members of the Tribal Relations Committee that have helped to make this happen. Now, you add the tribal liaison position on top of that, it gets a little bit more complicated, and we've had a hard time trying to figure that out. I would say more in the past years that the Tribal Relations Committee has actually become sort of the tribal liaisons. And that's not the best way, because there are probably 30 intersecting programs between tribal governments and state governments, and they all need coordination. They all need help, and the Tribal Relations Committee only meets for about 3 days a year, so it's not enough time.
You've been an advocate for the Life Resource Center,
yes,
formerly called the Wyoming State Training School.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of changes are happening there. You and I were reflecting back when I was involved with the training school, 700 and some clients, 700 and some employees. And it's very different today. You have volunteered there. You've worked hard as a legislator there. What do you see its importance and its relevance here in Lander? Why should we continue to invest in it?
Well, it's an astounding place.
It is.
And it's a place where miracles happen. I'm intimately connected with the Wyoming Life Resource Center. I've been the guardian for a decade now of a man who is one of the most profoundly impacted persons in Wyoming. And so I'm very...
And when you say impacted, to be frank, probably, and I don't know, but severe physical challenges, severe mental challenges.
All of that, yeah. And a very wonderful, caring person who he's done so much for me to be this person's guardian, but there is no other place for him, honestly. And there are quite a few folks just like that. So I think there's a future for that population, but that is only kind of a piece of what the Life Resource Center's mission is going to be. And, it's been redefined that very hard to place, the Department of Health likes to call them the legacy population, which I don't really like that much, but there are folks that were left after all the people that could be moved out were moved out. And these are very profoundly disabled individuals. And I should say people, first language, people with profound disabilities. That's a better, more respectful way to say it. But our options aren't very good for those people. So there'll be a future for them at the Life Resource Center, thankfully, and thank the state of Wyoming for rising to that commitment. But that's only the beginning, because of the ability to have more of an intermediate and long-term presence for people with acquired brain injury, very hard to place people, duly diagnosed people that allow for maybe a better environment than they might currently receive with state facilities elsewhere. So I'm excited about, and the model that's being employed is called the greenhouse model. I don't know if you've heard about this, but it's very holistic, human-centric, wonderful new way of providing elder care. And a
great example of that is in Sheridan for elderly folks.
Yeah, so that'll be the new basis for operation of the Life Resource Center. But it actually, the facility was one of the first places to actually pioneer some early elements of the greenhouse model. And they do astounding work. I'll just give you one example. I knew a girl up there who's no longer alive. She lived for 17 years on a ventilator. Now listen, that's unheard of. And if you look at their other elements of care, these people have to be repositioned every 2 hours, their entire life. They don't have skin problems at the Wyoming Life Resource Center because they are so good at protecting the integrity of care, getting all the therapies they need. It's the kind of care in a unified team approach that everybody wishes they had in America. So it's where we're doing the very best. And nationally surveyed, the very top. World surveyed, at the very top. So we can learn from what they're doing and benefit, who knows, veterans, benefit other folks with needs. I'm very, very excited about that.
We'll hop to another subject.
Okay. You're pretty hoppy.
We are. We have lots to cover with you, Senator. That's probably why. And here's an example. You were in Georgia recently, and I'm not talking about the state whose capital is Atlanta. You were overseas working. What were you doing?
So I was in the former Soviet Republic of Georgia. It was my second trip this year to Georgia, and I was working for the United States. It's called USAID, Aid for International Development. I've had lots of time lots of opportunities in the past 30, 40 years to travel to other countries and work on usually public utility issues. You know, from my background, I had been at the Illinois Commerce Commission. Most people don't know that, but that's a utility regulatory commission. And that's kind of where I picked up a lot of my work within the electric utility industry, kind of come back to the wind tax. But I also was involved in the telecommunications reforms. And
you still work with technology for Wyoming? I'll throw that in real quick.
Yeah, I do. I'm very proud of the work leading the tech committee, along with Chairman Zawanaser from the House. And we've been involved in, all the accessibility that you see on the website for Wyoming legislature. I'm very proud of that. So anyway, I do consulting work, and specifically in Georgia, I was working on the nation's water system, where they have a kind of overly centralized model, and they're trying to break it down a little bit, and the question is how to do that. And you have to imagine it's about the size of Wyoming, and all the little water companies and all the little towns are run from the capital, which would be like running Hudson and Shoshone's water company from Cheyenne. And it doesn't work very well, but it's a legacy of a Soviet system.
Centralistic government, so to speak.
But we're making progress there. I really enjoyed it. I've worked on electricity issues in a lot of different countries, customer service issues, energy, telecommunications. I've been very fortunate.
Senator, for those of us who have the great pleasure of coming to work in the Capitol during the session or the temporary Capitol, the day the baseball glove appears on your desk is a great day in my eyes because two things. One, the legislative session is nearing its end.
We're getting right on spring training, right?
And spring training started. How did that start?
I've got a great love for baseball. And I think it probably started mostly.
And tell everyone who you're a fan of.
Well, I'm a Cubs fan.
Sure,
I spent some time in Illinois and in Chicago.
This is a Cardinals fan here.
Yeah, so we do have a little friction. But Springfield was like where I lived in Illinois was like half and half. There were bars that were Cardinals.
Still are today.
Yeah,
actually, yep.
Yeah. So I'm really excited with baseball these days. Although I kind of follow George Will, and how we need to maybe speed up a little bit, but. In Wyoming, we used to play baseball at the university level.
Sure.
And
Greg Brock. Bill Ewing. And Jim
you
Jones.
got it.
Absolutely.
It was tough to do baseball in Wyoming, but when the university decided to cut down on its number of sports and baseball went by the wayside, some of us tried to encourage them to get it back. And we would have bills or amendments trying to get baseball. And then we started celebrating spring training. It's kind of everybody's watching it anyway. Why not bring a little bit of fun into the Capitol? So I'm not alone on that. There's been several of us over the years that break out the gloves. We're going to miss John Hastert. He always had his glove. And Michael Von Flatern, he'll have his glove. And we miss Tony Ross. He always had a glove.
Not only, Senator, are there gloves, there's the ball every now and then.
The ball does come out, and we see if we have arms. And Jane Mockler, when we used to serve with her, she'd hold her breath about the artwork. We've gone to a Nerf ball, actually, the past year or so. But
What?
I think
Well,
we're
that's
not.
no fun.
I know we're not as good as we used to be, but we don't practice enough.
Well,
But sometimes the balls get going pretty fast.
yeah. It's been great to watch you. I've had the luxury, Senator, of living in Fremont County for a long time before we moved to Cheyenne, and have known you for a long period of time. You enjoy what you do.
I love it.
It seems to me.
Yeah. It's been a very wonderful opportunity for me to, I like the kind of every aspect of it. I like having to make thoughtful decisions. I like being able to help people. I'm very grateful for my reelection and look forward to going down to Cheyenne. And especially, this wind tax issue, it's very prominent for me because it is about future generations and whether they'll have a revenue stream from something that we're giving away too cheap right now.
Well, it's a pleasure, Senator.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for joining us.
We'll see you in Cheyenne.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
And again, we thank Senator Cale Case for having us at his home for that Capital Outlook profile. And now we're going to turn the page to two freshman legislators here in the Wyoming legislature, Representative Sandy Newsome from Park County and Representative Cyrus Western from Sheridan County. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
Good to be on the show.
Thank you. Yes, Representative Newsome, let me talk with you first. This bridge, has it been difficult for you going from candidate to legislator? Has it been exactly what you thought it would be? We're halfway through the session. What are you thinking as you reflect?
I thought it is very similar to what I thought. The speed at which we work is not at all similar to what I thought. It's a very fast-moving, fast pace that we do here, and I've been startled at how much legislation gets run through in a day, and how those bills impact us all. And so every night I have my reading list of every bill that we're going to look at the next day, and I try to get through those. If I don't get through them in the evening, I get up early in the morning, and I know Cyrus is here early as well, and we're just preparing ourselves for the day at hand. And sometimes it works, sometimes the day works out how you thought it would, and sometimes not at all, depending on the length of discussion on a particular bill.
Speaking of length of discussion, you two both are on the Transportation, Highways, and Military Affairs Committee. You were here a little late last night.
We were.
Yeah.
10:30.
We were 10:30.
Yeah, 10:30.
Representative, how's this work for you? You obviously have made a decision to run. You campaigned very hard in Sheridan County, and now you're here.
Yeah, for me, I mean, I think it's been a relatively easy transition. I was acquainted myself with the legislature, how the legislative process worked prior to. I did my homework on some of the bills that were coming for the committees that I was on. So for me, it was a pretty smooth transition. The speed is definitely going pretty quickly. And so you're having to keep pace with everything. It's a little bit of a challenge, but we're treading water.
Yeah, you both are from the northern part of Wyoming. Wyoming, as you know, is a big state. Is it difficult for you to look at bills that might be relevant to your county, but may not be in the best interest of the entire state? Has those types of bills come across your desk, and how have you dealt with those?
I haven't run across too many of those. I think that for the most part, the bills that we're looking at this point pretty much encompass the greater part of the state.
Is that troublesome at times?
I think that's one of those things, at least what I was told by people who had been in office for quite a while, is you vote your conscience and vote your district. And I think that's something I've certainly tried to abide by. And there have been some bills, for example, like the tobacco tax, where I think that some of the things I had to take into consideration may have been different than other districts around the state. So it does happen.
And that's a revenue bill that was voted on this week, and you voted not to
Correct.
impose an additional tobacco tax, and in fact, the bill died.
Yes.
You're on the Revenue Committee.
I am.
Representative Western. So where do you balance the need for additional revenue to the state of Wyoming versus the bills that continue to come across the committees?
Sure. And to kind of, elaborate on that, I think if in my district, I'm House District 51, right on the Montana border, right in Sheridan County. And right across the border is the Crow Indian Reservation. And so for that particular one, there are grocery stores and gas stations in Dayton and Ranchester, two towns that are in my district. And those respective kind of grocery store / gas stations are a big role in those communities. And selling tobacco products it's a big revenue generator from them. And if we were to increase the tax, it increases the incentive for people to go across the border into the reservation and purchase tobacco products there. And again, my no vote, look, I think kids smoking is a bad thing. And we should be putting resources into measures that prevent kids from trying tobacco. I absolutely in support of those kind of measures. And if something like that comes across the legislature, I will vote for it most definitely. But I think that was the thought process I went through. I thought, well, for example, the corner grocery in Dayton, Wyoming, this is something that could negatively impact them. I mean, it's a small community, and if one business in these small towns starts to hurt, that one business can kind of drag down the rest of the community in terms of sales taxes, all that other kind of stuff. So that was my thought process in going through that vote.
You both talked about fiscal responsibility in your campaigns. To quote you, Representative Newsome, you talked about, as I explored the possibility of running, I heard repeatedly the concern for fiscal responsibility in Wyoming's budget. You just got, this week, a copy of the supplemental budget. Is Wyoming fiscally responsible yet? Is that still a path Wyoming's on? Do you know?
At this point, I believe we are, but I don't know. And I have signed up. We were given the opportunity to put our preference in for extra task force and those sorts of things. And I put in to be on the efficiency task force because I believe that there are things that we can do to make our government more efficient and more effective.
You said that Cheyenne should make fiscal decisions, Representative Western, the same way a family manages their finances during hard times. They cut back on spending and tighten their belts rather than ask someone else to pay up. Wyoming still has some tightening up to do in its budget?
I think that, the question at large, I think there are states, other states in the U.S. that I think are very fiscally irresponsible. So I think that
responsible or irresponsible?
Fiscally irresponsible. Okay. So I think on a comparative scale, we're doing much better than a lot of other states. That being said, though, there's always room for improvement. I think that's what we need to focus on in improving that. I think that, it's like any spending. Look, the fact of the matter is that, when obviously we are dependent on the boom and bust cycle. And when times are good, the temptation by the state legislature to kind of be more trigger happy with the checkbook it's absolutely there. And I think maybe especially during those boom times, how can we think, well, I guess how can we have the mindset of maybe paring back that spending and instead of building a brand new school, let's renovate one. Obviously that was Coley's bonus money, but that's kind of the attitude that I endorsed.
You also talked about in your campaign, Representative Western, about a new generation of conservative values.
Sure, absolutely.
What does that mean?
Well, I think we are a conservative state, and I'm very proud of my conservative values and the things I hold dear. But at the same time, we always talk about how the future is left to the next generation. And being part of the younger generation, I felt it was my responsibility to step up and continue to carry that torch forward into the future.
Representative Newsome, you live in a very conservative part of Wyoming too, I would argue. What does that mean to you? Is Wyoming's conservative values different today than they were 10, 15 years ago? Are they the same?
I think they're very similar, and I'm excited to have the new generation in the legislature.
That's translated to younger, by the way.
Yes, and not knocking the older generation.
It is, it is refreshing to have those voices and to listen to those things that I don't have any idea. As we talk about blockchain and we talk about these new technologies, I'm excited that that's going on, although I may or may not fully understand it. I'm learning more and more about those things, but I think that we need to look at those technologies that will take us into the future, and the younger legislators are leading that charge, and I'm grateful for that.
And there still aren't many of you, quite frankly.
Yeah, no, I think in the House, I think there's maybe 6 of us that are under the age of, I think, like 35 or so, somewhere. You have to quote me on that, but it's right around there. So it's a small number.
Each of you is going to balance in your minds what it means for Wyoming to diversify its economy in the future. What does that mean to you today, Representative Western?
Well, I think it's, again, kind of what we were talking about prior to. It's what kind of communities do we want to live in? How do one of those communities to be comprised in terms of the demographics? And I think we all want to keep our young kids in the state, and I think that means diversifying the types of industry, so light manufacturing, services, all that kind of stuff. If you look at a state like Iowa, which is a very rural agrarian state, but Des Moines has managed to turn itself into kind of the back office capital of America. I mean, all the major banks, Wells Fargo, et cetera. They have these big back office operations in Des Moines. Not saying that's what that should be our game plan, but that's an example of how a state that was able to transform on its own terms, and it helped kind of secure a more stable economic future that wasn't just relying on one industry or another. Because obviously in Iowa, ag is huge. So that's just one example.
And in Park County, tourism is huge. That's
tourism
your
is huge.
background.
We are very fortunate in Park County to have a relatively diverse economy. So we have tourism, we have oil and gas, we have one of the first oil fields in all of Wyoming and Oregon Basin, and then we have this burgeoning gun manufacturing. We have 8 gun manufacturers in Cody, which we're very excited about. We also have Cody Labs, drug manufacturer, and we have the oldest manufacturer that's currently existing is Ytex, the maker of ear tags. They reside in Cody and they make ear tags in Cody. So they have a large manufacturing presence as well. We're very excited that Ytex has kind of led the way in the manufacturing space. They've been there a long time. The folks that started that are very active in the community. One of them actually serves on our city council, the owner of Ytex. And we're very excited that we have that manufacturing piece as well. So we are very fortunate in Cody that we have a diverse economy, but we would still like to bolster those industries that we already have and create new things as well.
We have about a minute left. If you were to complete this sentence for me now, from what I've learned, Wyoming's biggest challenges, what would you say? Representative Newsome, I'll let you go first.
I would say economic diversification, although I just said how diverse Cody is, that does not follow through to the rest of the state. And so I think that especially the middle of Wyoming, those middle communities need some help with the diversification. The bulk of Wyoming's population is around the edges of the state. So that middle section of the state, I believe, could use a little bit of more help with their economic diversity.
Representative Western?
I would have to agree. I mean, I'm very fortunate to be from Sheridan, that we've got some really great companies in Sheridan. Weatherby is kind of the big buzz company, but we've also got EMIT, we've got VacuTech, we've got Keenan Designs. These are some companies that are kind of trend setting in my community and across the state. And I think it's great. It's a really good step in the right direction, but I think we need to continue along that path. So.
Representative Cyrus Western, and Representative Sandy Newsome, it's been great to have you both. We'll continue this discussion with freshman legislators now for the rest of our Capital Outlook season. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for asking us.
Thank you.
And now we'll move forward to our weekly conversation with the leadership of the Wyoming legislature, Senate President Drew Perkins and the Speaker of the House, Steve Harshman. That's next. We continue now on Capital Outlook with our weekly discussion with the leadership of the Wyoming legislature, the President of the Senate, Drew Perkins, and the Speaker of the House, Steve Harshman. Gentlemen, welcome back to Capital Outlook.
Glad to be here again.
Yeah,
lots going on this week, but I want to talk a little bit about last week. Last Thursday, you had the opportunity to travel to Las Vegas to the SHOT Show, which is a large firearm outdoor industry show, one of the largest in the country. And you had an opportunity to not only recruit potential businesses that might be interested in coming to Wyoming, but also talk to Wyoming businesses that are here and what they need to be sustained. What did you learn? Our viewers are looking at a picture of you both now with the governor at SHOT Show. Mr. Speaker, I'll start with you.
Well, I'd never been there. I wasn't sure what to expect. And the only way, I talked to the House members and asked really for their permission, because I work for them, right? And they gave me really the blessing to go do this, thought it was important. So we left very early, got down there, had no idea, but really about the whole city of Casper in one building. It's enormous, and so we met with 5 potential prospects and 12 others who have gone through. I think the thing, first of all, we walked about 15,000 steps, never ate lunch, and my jaws hurt from talking and smiling all day. But it was a fascinating experience in the fact that folks are looking to come to our state, frankly, and I think there's a lot of challenges out there, and workforce being one of them. But and then speaking to folks from Weatherby who are in Sheridan's the most recent, to Magpul, to others all around the state, it's just they just love Wyoming, and they are now becoming our best salesmen, our best economic development tool as they talk to their cohorts in this industry.
Is workforce the biggest hurdle, Mr. President?
Well, it certainly was a common thread we found amongst the 5 prospects that we talked to, along with the 12 who were at Wyoming, who are already in Wyoming, that were also presenting or exhibitors at the SHOT Show. And that was a common thread. 2 things. One was It's taking a long time to get background checks, and so we're trying to get to the bottom of that. But the other one was workforce, and it's just workforce as a whole. It's not that there's not people, it's that they need trained people, they need machinists, they need welders, they need people with skills to come and go to work because they have been successful. They started at 8, now they're at 20, now they're at 30 people since they've come to Wyoming. The transplants that have moved here to do that love Wyoming. They're saying, if there's anybody we can talk to, you tell them to come talk to us, even if you're prospects. We'd love to tell them how much we love Wyoming. But their common thread was we need more people with technical skills.
So how do you respond to that? Is it the cart before the horse? Is it the community college's responsibility? What happens?
Well, I think that's the hard part. And I think some of it is the chicken or the egg question, but it's probably a little both at the same time. And I think, I don't think there's one answer to that. I think part of it is build it and they'll come. We talk to a lot of young people from Texas who have moved with their company and they're just outside of Cheyenne here. And so that's part of it. Community colleges are a big part of it. Our schools, university as well, into the whole business piece of that and engineering. So I think and industry plays a big part of it.
On to another topic. Medicaid now has been discussed. Representative Schwartz has been contemplating a bill for much of this session. It's now come forward. Your bodies have talked about Medicaid expansion for years and years, especially since Governor Meade decided that it might be a good idea. Where does that bill stand, Mr. Speaker? It's a House bill. Are you supporting it? Does Wyoming need to expand now? Does it need further study that maybe has happened since 2014? Where are we at?
Well, I think it does need further study. I think as we learn more, as we watch other states go through this experience, but I think there will be some component of study, whether it works through a Senate file or a House bill or through a budget amendment, that we're going to probably expand Medicaid to pay for special education services, K-12, right? Every state does it but us. We'll probably look at mental health. I think work requirements, all these things. And I think the president, will probably talk about, you got to find that sweet spot too. We got a lot of people who have good insurance now on the exchange. We certainly don't want to do anything to kick them off of those insurance plans. So I think it'll continue to be studied and talked about. We need to continue to look at it.
What's going to happen this session, Mr. President?
This session, I think you'll see, as far as Medicaid expansion, I think you'll see there's a little bit of work coming through to expand the Medicaid reimbursement for schools. I think you'll see a study that comes out of it. And the reason that's important is I've talked to legislators from states who have expanded, and they tell me that there's a pretty common thread, and that is one, don't do it, they regret it, it's expensive. I believe that in Boston, Medicaid has gone from about 14% of their budget, now up around 40-odd% of their budget. It's been a very expensive proposition, even with the promise that the federal government will pay the majority. But we think that there's some sweet spots. We think that there's some places where you can hit that people can still get great insurance through the exchanges. I've got a daughter in Utah who pays $10 a month for insurance through the exchange.
That's after subsidies.
After subsidies. We believe that there's people who are paying as low as $5 a month through Blue Cross Blue Shield after subsidies. And so you don't want those people to leave and go to Medicaid, but there is a hole out there that could fill that we think that there would be both cost effective to the state and very beneficial to people. And we want to try and figure that out and see if we can get it done.
Can you help me clarify something? We've heard the numbers have been between 17,000 and 20,000 Wyomingites might be impacted. Are those people that don't have any insurance at all, or are some of those people that have insurance and would switch? Do we know?
Well, what you have, Mr. President,
Mr. Speaker, go ahead. Yeah,
what you had, if you go back a few years and what it was, all those numbers come out of what's called the Milliman study. It was a nationwide actuarial study that did this, and that's what everybody relied upon in expanding Medicaid. That 17,000 number comes out of there. One of the things that also was in that study and has proven true, that about 50% of the people that actually move to Medicaid expansion and a full expansion are already insured, and they just migrate because they can get it for free or no cost to them on the full expanded Medicaid. So about 50% of the people that migrate over there have insurance already. And the other interesting statistic is about 70% of the people on Medicaid are able-bodied. And those two figures together are very disconcerting. The third one is that roughly about twice as many people end up signing up for Medicaid as were anticipated in the Milliman study. So it's probably not 17, it's probably going to be closer to 34, 35,000. And again, if 50% of those are already insured, and just migrate off private insurance, we've really harmed our private insurance base, which is already struggles in Wyoming.
All right, on to another topic. Critical infrastructure bill is still in House labor. We're filming this on Thursday. It might be decided tomorrow, Friday. How big of an issue is this in your mind, Mr. Speaker, relative to whether this limits people's rights for free speech, whether it impedes economic development? Where do you stand on this issue?
Yeah, these are good issues. I mean, we debate these things, you know, everything from the death penalty repeal to abortion and to sanctuary cities to these issues. They're tough. And so freedom's not absolute. And I think where you find that balance of property rights and people's right for free expression. And so I think that bill is important to be heard and talked about, obviously, in our state, I think, and all that we got going on with interstate commerce and all of our industry. So I think it's going to get a fair hearing. It's getting a lot of attention, more because of more of the things that have happened nationally, frankly, than what's happened in Wyoming. But it's like all those things. I don't think we're going to shy away from the tough issues just because they're getting a lot of attention.
I think it's two things. One is there's no right that's in the Bill of Rights that doesn't have some that is without limits. Everyone has limits, and you have to balance that with private property rights as well as in some cases national security needs. And so people have a right to personal. So it's just trying to find that balance between freedom of expression and freedom of protest, freedom of speech, and also the personal property rights and private property rights that both underline and underscore our entire constitutional process.
Big question of the day now is Super Bowl picks.
Yeah. Well, I know Tom Brady, I just think, and the Patriots, and I know everybody kind of, but geez, you got to admire what they've done.
Mr. President, are you on board the Patriots train?
You know, my team's got lost early. Broncos had a horrible season. I was pulling for the Saints, and of course, that would happen. But hey, it's a great American game, and it's going to be good. So you got a young gunslinger against a wily veteran quarterback in Tom Brady. I'm looking forward to the game.
To both of you, thank you again for spending time with us. It's a busy time, a lot of late nights here at the legislature this week, and appreciate you joining us this week.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So that's a wrap now for week 4 of Capitol Outlook. We are halfway through the session. We'll be back next week. Again, thanks for joining us.
This program is supported in part by a grant from the BNSF Railway Foundation, dedicated to improving the general welfare and quality of life in communities throughout the BNSF Railway service area. Proud to support Wyoming PBS.
And in part by the Wyoming Public Television Endowment and viewers like you.